Hi guys, Mike here. So, it seems that everyone likes to talk about politics these days, endlessly debating people we disagree with, in a constructive manner, of course. And although we may feel as if we were all knowing, when it comes down to it, do we even understand the basics? Like, what Canada's system of governance is and why we have it? Here, let's have a look. Alright, for starters, Canada is what's called a federal constitutional monarchy, where the crown is the core of our Westminster style parliamentary democracy. I guess to a lot of you, that really doesn't sound so simple, does it? Well, it's not so complicated when you break it down. This video will be the first in a series that explains Canada's system of government. In this video, we'll start by looking at how Canada is what's called a mixed form of government. Now, what exactly do I mean by a mixed form of government? Well, another way to phrase it is Canada has a mixed constitution. And by constitution, I mean the principles that establish the basis of the way the country is ruled. A mixed constitution is a form of government that mixes or combines elements of democracy, which is rule of the many, aristocracy, rule of the best, and monarchy, rule of the one. The Canadian form of mixed constitution comes to us from the British, but this was inspired by philosophers such as Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, Niccolo Machiavelli, John Locke, and many others. It is important to understand that every form of constitution, monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy, have both good and bad elements to them. Now, many prominent philosophers looked at the way these forms of constitutions could become corrupt and degenerate. This is often looked at by philosophers as a never-ending cyclical process. Now, let's take a look at these constitutions and how they degenerate. Now, a monarchy has absolute power over its citizens. It's the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of government all in one. So imagine now you had a good, wise king who was virtuous and just. He loved his people, and his people loved him. So how could this form of government become corrupt? Well, imagine now that wise king had a son, and that son isn't trained in the same manner or doesn't possess the same virtues as his father. The son is pleasure-seeking, wicked and cruel. Eventually he becomes king, and enslaved to his vices, he becomes a tyrant. Eventually the nobles, or the aristocracy, would step in and limit the power of the king and take over to end the tyranny. Now this will lead us into the next form of constitution, aristocracy. In an aristocracy, the aristocrats, the supreme upper class, are the main power holders and lawmakers. Imagine these aristocrats are virtuous. They love their country. Perhaps they rule by council to ensure their collective experience and values prevent the rise of another tyrant king. How does this form of government break down? Just imagine for a second the next generation of aristocrats, the sons. They're greedy, corrupt, and pleasure-seeking because they are raised in luxury and do not develop the necessary virtues to rule. When these sons come to power, they will be wealth-seeking and power-hungry. Instead of making laws for the benefit of society, they will focus on themselves. At this point, the aristocracy has degenerated into an oligarchy, ruled by and for the rich. The people will eventually rise up and take control of the government and kick out the oligarchs and rule themselves. Here you have democracy. Philosophers like Plato and Aristotle argued that over time, democracy becomes corrupt and turns into a form of mob rule or tyranny. This is because people are self-interested and only pursue individual interests and desires. For example, Plato considered democracy as one of the lowest forms of government because he believed democracy led to tyranny. He argued that political leaders would only be interested in being popular with the masses, and as a result, they would persuade the masses into their favor by catering to people's appetites and desires, which he viewed as the lowest elements of the human soul. People would have the freedom to do what they want, but their freedom would be an illusion because people would be enslaved to their appetites and desires. This would lead to moral corruption and the dumbing down of society, opening the door for the tyrant. Aristotle agrees with Plato that democracy would degenerate, but he goes a step further by worrying about the excesses of power and the tyranny of the majority over the minority. Aristotle believes the ideal constitution is not achievable, so the best that can be hoped for is a mixed constitution of aristocratic and democratic rule with limits on power. So now that we understand where mixed constitutions came from, let's take a look at Canada. Canada's mixed government system is best understood by referring to what some have called the Trinity in Parliament. Our parliamentary system has a traditional element, the monarch, the crown, which represents order and stability. There's an appointed council, the Senate, representing experience and values. Lastly, there is an elected assembly, the House of Commons, which is responsive to the sentiments of the population. So we know that each form of constitution has positive and negative sides to it, and we know that they can degenerate. Canada's balanced constitution was set up to provide the benefits of the positive elements of each form while constraining the negative ones. This was supposed to prevent the constitutions from becoming corrupt and ruining society. So this is what it means when we say Canada has a mixed form of government. The next video will look at Canada as a constitutional monarchy. Thanks for watching.